Hey friends, did you know that Feminist Frequency recently launched the Games and Online Harassment Hotline? Well, we sure did. It is a confidential, text-based emotional support resource for folks who make and play games. You can learn more at gameshotline.org, and please, please help us spread the word so we can reach the people who need it the most.
And so every time she says something like, oh, can I play with him or whatever, it's meant to be a joke. I know that if the genders were reversed and that if this was a, character who was a dude who was in his mid-20s talking about young girls that way, that would be beyond the pale, and rightfully so.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is a show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by two women who just need to absorb a child's soul before the sun rises tomorrow. Carolyn Pettit. And Ebony Adams.
Hey.
This week, we're going to be talking about the Disney Halloween staple, Hocus Pocus. Stay tuned. Hello, friends.
Hey. Hello.
Okay, so I want to talk about the rest of this month. Can we do that real quick?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we decided to let the next three this and the next two episodes be a little thematic, Halloween-y, kind of, sort of. Mm-hmm. And instead of going the horror route, which Carolyn and I are too afraid to do, we can occasionally, but whatever. We decided to get into the vampires and witches. So this week, this episode, we're talking about Hocus Pocus, which I was really excited to go back and watch for the first time in a long time. But we reached out to all of you, our lovely Patreon backers, and asked you what vampire movie you would like us to talk about. It was between Blade, Interview with the Vampire, and The Hunger. Now, I would just like to express my deep, deep disappointment in all of our patrons who did not vote for The Hunger because I've never seen it and I want to, so I'm going to keep bringing this up and hoping one day Carolyn and Ebony will be like, fine, we can talk about it.
Into it.
But, so the final, at the time of the poll closing, which is just literally right now, it was a tie between Blade and Interview with the Vampire. So we're just going to have to pick one, y'all.
And we're going to pick the one that has some black people in it that are not slaves.
Yep. I think that's a good choice. I got to be honest, I'm sort of relieved that we picked Blade because I tried to watch Interview with the Vampire I don't know, I think 6 months ago or not that long ago. And I just got so fucking bored, I turned it off.
Oh, man. No, I mean, I love Interview with the Vampire.
I loved it when I was younger, but I don't know. Anyways, we're going to talk about Blade. And then we are also going to talk about The Witches of Eastwick, which is a film that I've never seen either. So stay tuned for all of our upcoming episodes.
And if you, like me, are wondering where the horror talk is this Halloween, feel free to dip into my Twitter mentions because I'm watching tons of stuff right now during this spooky season. And I can't talk about it with Anita and Caro. So I need you, the listeners, to...
I'm curious. I like horror, and I think horror is very interesting and psychologically complex and very cathartic and valuable. I usually am too chicken to watch horror movies on my own, and because I'm basically alone right now, I'm I'd love to get cozy with somebody and watch some horror movies, but that's not an option in my life at this moment. So, but that doesn't mean that I'm not fascinated by the genre. So, Ebony, if you watch some super interesting horror movies, by all means, pass that stuff along, and I'll put it on my list for stuff to maybe watch someday if and when I have somebody to watch it with some Halloween.
And listeners, I want to be clear. I have invited Caro down to spend the month with me on the couch, cuddling in our conjoined sleeping bags, watching horror movies, and she keeps turning me down. Yeah. But one movie I do want to shout out. I want to say we're recording this on Indigenous Peoples Day.
Oh, yes.
And a writer that I follow on Twitter, at Ice Age Baby, an Indigenous woman, posted a bunch of like amazing indigenous movies from, various communities. And one of the things she posted that I had never heard of is a movie called Blood Quantum, which is an indigenous zombie movie. I think it came out this year, and I believe it's available on Amazon. So I'm checking that out next after I finish The Haunting of Bly Manor.
Yeah, I'm watching The Haunting of Bly Manor too.
I'd love to talk about it with you later.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about it. I will watch horror during the day when the sun is up.
That's legit.
Or like, and also, or with people. Like, I can't watch it alone. And I already feel like I already get nervous at night by myself, even though I live alone. Like, sometimes I'm like, what was that? What was that noise? And if I'm like watching a horror movie, I will legit freak out. So yeah, I'm not opposed to horror, but I need it to be special. It can't just be like for shits and giggles. I do also want to shout out, we had Jessica Zolman on our podcast to talk about The Mandalorian and back last year. And every year she watches 30 days of horror movies. Mm-hmm. And we'll link to her Instagram. I think it's just JZombie. Because she documents it and has all of these playlists and stuff if you're interested. And so this year, I think her week summaries are really, really interesting. So if this is your deal, there are lots of people doing great stuff around horror right now.
Can we get her back to talk about season 2 of The Mandalorian? Because I think it's launching at the end of this month.
I know, it is launching soon. Yeah,
bring her back.
Let's try. Her. Okay, y'all, let's get into some witchy witches. 300 years ago, the good people of Salem hanged the wicked Sanderson sisters, but not before they cast one final spell. Should a virgin light the black flame candle in their lair, the witches would return to cast black magic and suck the souls from Salem's children once again. On Halloween night in 1993, young Max Dennison wants to prove to his crush Allison that he's not afraid of all that hocus pocus, and he lights the candle, inadvertently bringing the spirits of the Sanderson sisters back to life. However, the sisters only have one night to absorb a child's soul, or with the sunrise, they will turn to dust. A madcap comedy adventure ensues as the Sanderson sisters find themselves encountering modern Halloween festivities and mistaking a man dressed as Satan for their actual lord and master. While Max, Allison, and Max's kid sister, Danny, played by Thora Birch, try to defeat the sisters with a little help from a talking cat and a friendly zombie.
A friendly zombie played by the one and only
Doug Jones.
That's
no
right.
way, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Podcast
man.
icon Doug Jones. I love that you point out that Danny is played by Thora Birch, but you don't point out that, the Satan they mistake for their master is played by Gary Marshall.
So that
just proves the age difference that is important to a viewing of this film.
I mean,
I didn't recognize him at all.
It's so just to talk about the weirdness of the production of this movie a little bit. And this is totally fine. Because there's no romance in this portrayal or whatever, but the married couple that the Sanderson sisters encounter, Satan and his wife, are played by Gary Marshall and Peggy Marshall, who
I recognize Peggy Marshall for sure.
Yeah, and they were in real life, they were brother and sister, but
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
so
hilarious.
the fact that Gary Marshall and Penny Marshall played husband and wife in this was not the thing that was most disturbing, but it was right up there for me. The first thing that was most disturbing for me is how we keep talking about how this kid Max Dennison is a virgin. For some reason, maybe it's because I'm so old, but I was just like, okay, we get it. A virgin had to light the candle. But quit bringing up that this kid is a virgin.
So
he's supposed to be. He should be.
Yeah. So let me talk about what I find so fascinating about this film, because that gets right at the heart of it. Is there's a kind of duality for me with this film, this kind of complex thing where I can see it very clearly in two different ways, right? I think on the surface, ideologically, this has that kind of, the Disney wholesome, quote unquote wholesome, status quo reinforcing kind of, this is a film that sort of blandly reinforces white capitalist patriarchy, not in some egregious, offensive, heavy-handed way that so many other films do, but just in those the more subtle ways that like where you just as a kid growing up, you watch like 1,000, 5,000 films and TV shows that kind of have these values, and you just kind of absorb them, and it just kind of rubber stamp. And, you know, with these women who are outsiders, you know, being cast as like the evil that must be kind of stamped out, and, you know, I mean, all of these things, and like the weird stuff about just kind of reinforcing a very heteronormative sexuality with like the talk of like Allison's yabos or whatever. Like, I mean, like, what the fuck? Like, you know, it's just this very like kind of straightforward white kid, you know, white male, like sexuality undercurrent thing going on in this film. But at the same time, right, like the like if this film, whatever enduring appeal this film has and whatever lingering power it has in our collective consciousness, is not because like Max Dennison is some memorable hero character or whatever. Like, it's not any of that. Like, it is the Sanderson sisters themselves that are like what makes this film kind of interesting, and maybe like, you know, they're the characters. It is the transgressive women in this film, and like the way that maybe they give young people, and probably particularly in some cases like young queer people even, like some sort of safe way of identifying with something that's kind of like transgressive, that falls outside the norm. And even if those characters are ultimately like defeated and like stamped out and like are, you know, the evil and the threat in this film and everything, there is nonetheless, like they are nonetheless the lingering sort of the only thing in this film that's of any like lasting impact. Like who fucking cares about Max Dennison, right? Or who, whatever. Like the white bread kind of ordinary rubber stamp like kind of kid hero or whatever. Like nobody really, I don't think. But the Sanderson sisters are why this film is, you know, whatever cultural kind of cachet this film has, it is because of them, right? So,
and just a reminder, the Sanderson sisters are played by Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Kathy Najimy. Yeah. So it's just like, it's quite the cast of witches.
Yeah. And they're like, they're over the top. They're very, you know, I mean, they have three very distinct personalities, but I mean, you know, there's a lot there to enjoy in those characterizations, right? I mean,
oh yeah, I mean, so I had never seen this film all the way through before. I was too old for it when it came out. And for someone who reads a shit ton of middle grade books and YA books, I have a hard time with a lot of kids media for reasons I would love to unpack on a future episode, or perhaps just with my therapist. But anyways, this film was interesting for me, as Caro suggests, only in the, you know, the continued appearance of the Sanderson sisters, but also the ways in which, like, as a piece of kids media, it does something I love, which is recognize that kids love to be scared in safe ways, and that there is this profound allure to being bad. And so I love films like this one, you know, like Beetlejuice, like The Addams Family, like these family-friendly movies, but that recognize that, like, you know, the boring, straight-laced, like just regular white folks are not captivating. They're not interesting. They're not free. They have no power. You know, like you at some level, on a very surface level, like this is not even hidden, you want to spend more time with the Sanderson sisters. They're simply having more fun, you know? And like the way that Bette Midler is just like chewing through these scenes, it is fantastic. Any scene without her in it, I'm not interested in. Like, I could barely get through this movie because there's too much having to do with like folks who are not Bette Midler, you know? And the film's only like an hour and a half long, but I was like, you can literally get rid of all of the children and just have the Sanderson sisters, and I'd watch 6 seasons in a movie into it.
Yeah, it was I think it was definitely a sweet spot in my childhood, like, because I was definitely the age that I believe this was targeted for when it came out. And I don't, like, Carolyn saying like, I don't remember Max, or like, I didn't remember anything other than the Sanderson sisters because they're so memorable, and they're so memorable because they're over the top and they're goofy and they're, you know, funny, and they are very distinct personalities. Now the movie is pretty like, the movie is pretty vapid. Like it's not like it's like a fun, playful movie for kids about witches. And I think the reason it's had such a standing legacy is because partly the cast, and you know, partly because it's so hard to forget the witches in it. You know, it's a pretty solid movie in and of itself. It stands up pretty well, like over time. You know, like. It's fine. It's fine. Does
it though? I mean, like, okay, the films that I just mentioned, like Beetlejuice, like The Addams Family, the one that came out with, you know, oh God, Raul Julia and so Angelica Houston. Like, exactly. Like, I just recently watched both of those films, and those films I think really do hold up. And again, they're also family movies, right? But there's something that is very much of the Disney school for this movie that just was never to my taste, even when I was a kid. You know, like the acting is so, apart from like the adult professionals, the Disney school of acting, whereby kids like deliver their lines in this certain kind of way, just drove me fucking around the bend.
Yeah,
you know?
It's like, this is what I mean, is almost like the Sanderson sisters themselves are fascinating and fun to watch and everything, but whenever it's not them and their lives and their, you know, whatever they're scheming and everything, like even in like its reinforcing of the status quo, it does it in such a clunky, like bland way that I'm just like rolling my eye. Like, so for instance, there's a line early on where, Max encounters those two bullies. And
Jay and Ice,
right? Of course, Ice. Yes, Ice. Who could forget Ice? But you know, and a short while after that, after he loses, or you know, he loses his shoes to those two. I think it's Danny. Like, he has an exchange where, like, he says, they would have killed me, and somebody says, like, at least you would have died like a man. Like, it's that kind of like reinforcement of like what it, you know, means to be a boy or a man, right? That just kind of runs like an undercurrent throughout this film. And it's a very, just kind of like, these are, you know, they're all kind of like wealthy,
what's interesting
people
about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, what's interesting about that is I think that most of where that comes from is the little sister. Like, most of the prodding of Max's masculinity is from his kid sister. It's like, yeah, he's definitely like, the bullies are, you know, making fun of him, and we're trying to, the movie's trying to position him as like a bit of a loser, even though like the fact that he in the middle of the class to everybody is like, here's my number if
oh my gosh.
You know, like I don't think that, like, it's just, this movie's really weird about who Max is and what Max represents. But like, I think it's the little sister that says the really problematic stuff around like, oh, if you were a man, or like you're a virgin, or like her yabos. Like, it's all coming from Danny, which I think is super troubling.
It is troubling, but and also like, that almost lends it more authority. Like, if you're a young man, like, well, of course you want to fulfill the expectations of what, you know, women and girls think or say or tell you it means to be a man. Like, I mean, we can roll our eyes at like a kid's sister, and yet there is this sense of like, oh, I have to live up to those sorts of ideas or standards or expectations. But there's just like, it's the dialogue and it's the way it's delivered and everything. And so, for lack of like a better term, for me, this film, outside of like the Sanderson sisters themselves, it has like this kind of, this kind of like, I don't know of a better way to express this. So I feel like I'm insulting television when I say this, but it has a bit of like a made for TV movie feel to it, or at least like, and I mean that in the 90s sense, like you know, television by and large has gotten like a lot better.
I'm dying at Carolyn saying, "I'm afraid I'm making fun of TV."
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think television in general has gotten a lot better. And worse.
Oh no, I understand. I just.
but there's
so
just something about the whole vibe and atmosphere of this film where it just has that like, you know, that I agree that with Ebony, in other words, that it's on a lower tier than say The Addams Family or Beetlejuice, for instance, as a film.
So when I say it holds up, I'm gonna backpedal a little bit because I don't disagree with anything either of you are saying at all. I didn't want to gouge my eyeballs out the whole time I watched it. So to me, I'm like, cool.
Success.
Yeah.
But I
didn't either.
Something like this where I'm like, this could be really bad. Like this could, my memory of this could be whatever. I was like, it's fine. Like the movie is fine. It has all of the things I would expect of the time. It's not like, it's not incredible or amazing or whatever, but like, I didn't hate every second that I was watching it. But it's not good. It's not great by any means.
My hat's off to media critics who can actually really, dissect this stuff in a way that speaks to the needs of the audience for which it was created. Because clearly, I'm incapable. It was fine to watch, and I can imagine that if I were 10 watching this, I would have had fun with it. Like, the pacing and the jokes, might have hit me. I mean, I think young kids today are getting, I don't know, Disney's still a powerhouse, but I do believe that there are maybe more offerings that are slightly more sophisticated that are available for them. So, I probably have to be 10 in 1993 when this came out to have really gotten it, but who knows, But I mean, and I will fully own up to it. Like, I know that people love this movie. So again, my Twitter handle, hit me up. The things that were interesting about this movie to me, apart from the Sanderson sisters, were still the Sanderson sisters, but weren't even about the movie, So it was about and I'm so glad we're gonna be talking about the witches of Eastwick, because I do want to talk about the figure of the witch in our media, and especially the witch figure in this film, and the kind of triple goddess, like the matron, crone, maiden version. I love how that shit continues to reappear, particularly in a film like this one for kids, in which we continually bring up the fact that a virgin needed to light the candle, in which Sarah Jessica Parker, her character is constantly talking about wanting to play with young boys. I was profoundly unsettled by that.
So unsettling, isn't it?
But, but I think part of what horror does for adults to some degree, and a film like this does for younger people, by being family friendly, sort of safe, spooky tinged. It's not accurate to call this film horror, but it's it's a tale tinged with witches and witchcraft and spookiness and all that. It's almost like there has to be some confrontation with sexual weirdness, or some of that. I don't know. I'm clearly I haven't given this a lot of thought to articulate it as well as I would like, but I feel like part of why we, fairy tales whatever, Grimm's fairy tales for kids going back hundreds of years, are probably, in some way what the purpose they serve is psychologically and emotionally kind of preparing children for the uncertainties and the discomforting things and the scary things about being a person, and being an adult, and what it means to, or being a kid, and what it means to grow up and to confront all of this, these things inside of yourself that you don't really know what to make sense of or what to do with. And so I don't know, I feel like that stuff, yes, it's weird, it's a little uncomfortable, and yet I think Hocus Pocus is a more interesting film and a more effective film as the kind of again, kind of kids first spooky movie offering, for having a little bit of that in it, even if I think it skews a little toward a little too heavily in its messaging ultimately, though unsurprisingly, it being a Disney offering toward heteronormativity and all of that. at least there is some moments that make you sit up and go like, what? Like, that's a little strange or
well, I mean, I'll tell you what bothered me about it is that the way in which Sarah Jessica Parker, I think her character's name is Sarah, right? So the way that Sarah, they paint her as like this giggly, vapid, kind of vain, weirdly obsessed with young boys kind of character. It's played for laughs. And so every time she says something like, oh, can I play with him or whatever, it's meant to be a joke.
Right.
I know that if the genders were reversed and that if this was a character who was a dude who was in his mid-20s talking about young girls that way, that would be beyond the pale, and rightfully so. And I think it's of a line with the way that, again, we keep talking about Max being a virgin and it's played for laughs, like ha ha ha, Max, and I'm like, the dude is like 14, and so there's something that's meant to be kind of laughable, not ludicrous, but a little bit laughable about the fact that he's not got game, that he's a virgin, he doesn't have any experience. And I think there's this way in which we simply don't, we don't take seriously the harm that can be done to young boys. And so that's why I was upset.
Yes,
I totally get what you're saying, but I was just like, this is weird to me. If just one person had said to her character, like, you need to stop saying that. Like, just to have someone in the movie acknowledge that it was gross, that in fact her saying that was a horrifying thing, that was one of the scary things that the witches brought to the town of Salem, then I'd be like, okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Which they wouldn't have done in this movie, right? Like, this movie is not a movie that is trying to make a commentary on anything, right? Like that.
But I think it does. I mean, I think it does make commentary. I mean, not in. I think there is commentary in just the figure of Max as this. I
don't mean that it's not political,
right? Oh, yeah.
If that's what you're.
Well, no, I mean, sure.
Yeah, I mean, just like by nature of the fact that it is a cultural artifact, it contains commentary upon the culture that created it. It can't escape that. But it's not trying overtly to say things in the way that like everybody and their friend is trying to do Jordan Peele style horror these days without getting why Jordan Peele stuff works, And so we're getting just this rash of, quote unquote woke. Someone come punch me in the head for saying that horror. And that's not what's, going on here. But
I think that's a privilege afforded to art that aims to just reinforce the status quo, is that it can do that without seeming like it's saying anything, right? I mean, it doesn't have to, quote unquote, do commentary because the values are just embedded in it so invisibly. But then if you are trying to do something that's critical, that's when people say, "Oh, this is a film. This film is doing commentary. It's saying something about this." Whereas, like,
I'm just saying that in a movie that came out in 1993 by Disney for kids wasn't consciously being like, let's include lines that we can then counter for the sake of making a statement. Everything about this movie is political for sure, as is all media. But this is not a movie that any of the creators were thinking that they were going to do any kind of like...
Right.
And yet it is a Disney film. And we know that Disney does have those kind of creative meetings. We know that they hold like an incredibly, tight rein on anything that comes out with their name, and to the extent of like, changing lines or changing the way characters look. So, it's certainly like, I don't want to suggest that like what ends up on screen is just what is, like, it just happened to coalesce in this way that plays with, cultural tropes, the way that things always play with cultural tropes when it, deals with like young kids, or when it deals with people who are considered outsiders by a community, or when, we talk about like, family friendly fare and the nuclear family and whatever. Like, there is a Disney brand, and there's no way we're going to get something that falls even one iota out of the Disney brand. And so if that means that the story has to be tweaked, to present a certain message, that absolutely will happen. It's just, as Caro says, like, because it supports the status quo, because we have defaulted to whiteness and straightness and, like middle class versions of morality, it's virtually invisible to us. But luckily with a sense of time and distance, some of these things are more apparent.
I found it interesting that the stuff around Max being a virgin wasn't challenged more.
Mm-hmm.
I expected by him.
Yeah.
I expected it to be like a bigger deal, and it was definitely central. It's definitely used as a joke, but I was actually as delightfully surprised as I can be about anything in this regard, because I wasn't like overjoyed, but I just kept waiting for it to be like, I could have, or like, but I, whatever, like it, or whatever, like those kinds of things that you get a lot in these types of stories about shaming virginity. And so I don't know, that was a surprise to me.
Yeah. I mean, there is that, but also I feel like the whole film, aside from him, I don't know. I mean, that cop who's not a cop who they meet, who like, kind of shames him for, like pulls him aside and is like, "Are you really a virgin or whatever?" Like, I mean,
but he doesn't. But he himself is just like, yes, it's true. Like he's not like hyper confident around it, but he himself as a character doesn't really do anything with that information, which I thought was strange.
Yeah, it's just, and then like even the final joke or comment of the film almost isn't like when the spirits of Banks and his sister are walking away, and she's like, "Why did it take so long?" And he's like, "I had to wait for a virgin." It's like the film has to remind you one last time, right? And it's just, I mean, it's so like, I don't know what they're like. Are we supposed to laugh?
But also, do 10-year-olds like understand virginity? And do 10-year-olds like, do they get that joke? Or like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just a really weird thing
wanted
to focus
ask you, because you saw this when you were a kid, right? So like, do you remember?
I don't remember.
This is my question. Like, are kids just like glossing over that part? Just like, whatever.
And also, I think 10-year-olds, when I was 10, have a very different experience of sex and sexuality than 10-year-olds today.
Yeah.
Oh, right? For sure.
Like big time. And so, it's relevant to the context of kids watching it when I was a kid, but like that's why media is so different now, right? Like this movie today would look pretty different, I think. Well, I don't know. We still make a lot of crap, but two like cultural references of the time that kind of made me snicker a little bit was the mom dressing up as Madonna from the Blonde Ambition tour.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes.
And then the baby zooming commercial that was on TV. I was like, holy shit, I remember this commercial. I don't remember what it's for. I don't remember anything about it, but it just like took me back, because I was like, that was like a big cultural commercial thing that was on TV at the time.
Do you remember when Max has finally been persuaded to take Danny to go trick-or-treating, and he comes downstairs all sullen, wearing sunglasses and a hat, and his dad says, "What are you?"
Oh,
he says, "A rap singer." And then to really finesse the scene, the dad says, "Oh, then you need to turn your hat to the side."
It was painful.
Rolled off the couch and out onto my back porch for 10 minutes.
So painful.
I was like, please, because again, I had never seen this movie before, and I was like, if there is going to be a novelty rap in this movie, I'm going to burn this shit down, and I'm going to start with Anita's house. Luckily, we were spared that, but that kind of humor is what you get a rap singer.
And this is not on par at all with that. But another thing that I like rolled my eyes at was how they spend a lot of time getting the Sanderson sisters to like, acknowledging that they haven't seen the world evolve in the last 300 years. So like concrete was a big deal to them, right?
As if they didn't have roads in the 17th century.
It was the dumbest thing. But then you have there's two jokes. I forget the first one, but the second one is when Winifred is flying alongside the car and she makes jokes about, let me see your driver's permit and are you resisting arrest? And I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, like when did she absorb that information?
This is not consistent. Like, not that they care or anything.
I'm trying to be better about, taking movies on their own terms sometimes and not being obsessed with like, plot holes, because I think that's counterproductive a lot of times. But I truly could not get past the fact that the Sanderson sisters' home was left completely intact and had been turned into a museum with the actual artifacts. And I'm like, you mean to tell me that y'all were hanged by a community that was bent on murdering you for the evil they saw you do, and then they just left and they were like, okay, cool. We're just going to leave the house and we're just going to leave this shit in it. If they truly believed that y'all were witches, which you are, they wouldn't have done anything with y'all's little tools and toys and whatever. And just anybody could get in there. I was just like, come on, just give me a little explanation. Like, say that the house had been hidden for 300 years or something. I don't know, but...
I felt very uncomfortable at the end when Binks turns into his ghost self and he says to Danny, I shall always be with you, in this like deeply creepy, like, what the fuck is that relationship way? And
me too. And I was like, did y'all get that close during the movie?
Yeah,
I mean, admittedly, I blacked out at some point.
I was like, oh, is this a thing? Because kids and the animal and the cat and that, like, they bonded and whatever. But it just felt really gross. Like,
it's going to be like Jacob and Renesmee from Twilight. They imprinted on each other.
Oh my God, shut up. I can't. No. Don't do that to me. I will say, though, I was absolutely delighted that we got a little musical interlude from Bette Midler. I forgot. Was not expecting that. That was great. At the party.
Same.
I think that's something that you both brought up. It will be interesting as we continue watching the movies this month, is like the mythology around witches and the mythology around vampires and what that means. Like, you started to talk about that in terms of not just like the stereotypes and the archetypes of the witch, but like, kind of where they came from and like the vampires and where they came from and what they symbolize to us as a society and still continue to in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Like, that's why one of the reasons I'm super excited we're going to be talking about the Witches of Eastwick.
Yeah, I mean, just the way that, I mean, it's weird. It's interesting, right? Because the Sanderson sisters, they're both like a threat. I mean, because they're not like attached. They're not like married. They're not ordinary domestic women with like husbands and children and all that. But they're not like sexless. They're. I mean, there's something. It's like there's something sort of. I guess something about their sexuality that as something that doesn't fit into the norm of society is part of what like sets them apart, right? And I don't know. I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, me too. When at the beginning, when they first like successfully take the life essence from Emily, Binks's sister. I was really interested in that part because I am fascinated by the ways in which like spinsters, older women who are assigned to like this, really troubling category in society are presumed to be outside of like a generative or productive economy. And that ultimately is the problem. So they are no longer... they can't be controlled, via like reproduction, right? And this is profoundly troubling. And the only way to redeem them or recuperate them into that economy is for them to assist in the generative production of others, right? So like if you're a midwife, messing with herbs and shit, that's all right. But if you're messing with those same herbs, but you're not helping other women have babies, this is a problem. What are you doing off in that hut, by yourself? But again, like this film, and others like it, like it simply can't resist the allure of the freedom that these women have. We recognize like the danger they represent, but who would you rather hang out with?
Yeah, like
You know?
you're totally rooting for the sisters.
Yeah,
At the end of
you
the
know,
day.
like-
I don't care about those kids.
Yeah, you know, and so
Whatever.
I love that, but I also really am interested in the figure of like the old woman, like the crone, needing a young woman as a foil in particular, you know, and so. As I said, had never seen this movie before. I thought that there was going to be more between Allison and the witches,
Right.
you know, that ultimately we don't get. But whatever. Listen, I'm ready to watch anything about witches. Did y'all see that movie, The Witch? The Witch?
Yeah, didn't we
that came out-
talk about it?
No, we didn't. We didn't talk about it. No.
Yeah,
Because I
Yeah.
hated it. Is that why we didn't talk about it?
but
Probably.
listen, but it's fascinating in a lot of ways, right? Like at the end of that film, when Black Phillip is like, "Does thou wish to live deliciously?" Yeah, I do.
yeah.
Give me that butter. You know,
Hell
like,
yeah.
my cabin sucks. You know, my dad's abusive. You know, like I absolutely want to live deliciously. I love movies that recognize that. You know, so at least that's front and center in this film.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
I love it. We'll be right back with What's Your Freak Out? You know something you can do today? You can head over to patreon.com/femfreak and become one of our patrons. That's right. If you back this podcast, not only are you helping us keep it on the air and keep feminist critical media criticism alive, but you also get loads of fun perks like early access to podcast episodes, very special bonus episodes, merch discounts. What else you got? We even let our patrons help us decide on new episodes and upcoming topics. So go ahead and check that out. Patreon.com/femfreak.
What's your freak out?
Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. I'm actually really excited because we got a guest freak out who is commenting on the last episode. As I was reading the intro, I sort of like fumbled over heroine hero. Like I didn't like using the gender term.
No, I'm the one who
heroine.
said hero, and you corrected me. I want to be clear. I'm the one
Well,
who
you
had the
wrote-
fuck up. Yeah.
No, well, what happened was Ebony wrote the script and wrote heroine, and I read it and then corrected and said hero because I don't like using I don't like using actor and actress. It's a choice that I make. But so one of our great listeners and supporters had some thoughts about gendered language, and I wanted to play their thoughts, and then maybe we could chat a bit about it. Take it away.
Hi, Feminist Frequency Radio. My name is Helcio, and I have a freak out that is actually a question. Even though I have been living in the US for the past 10 years, I am originally from Brazil, and my first language is Portuguese. As with all other Latin-derived languages, Portuguese is gendered. Objects, fruits, places, they all are gendered, as are most occupations. The general rule is, if a word ends in O, it is usually male and it is paired with male articles. If a word ends in A, it is usually female, and if a word ends in E, it can be used with any gender depending on the context. There are some exceptions to these rules. All of that is to say that for me, it is a little bit hard to understand how gender terms can be considered inherently negative, since it is the basis of my entire first language. I completely agree with the argument that gendering professions when they are not necessarily gender dependent, such as actor or actress, is unnecessary at best, and at worst, it reinforces gender stereotypes and excludes gender nonconforming folks. However, I have heard opposing arguments that I believe also have some valid points. In Portuguese, the word for president is the same as the word in English, but with an extra E at the end. Presidente. Because of that E, the word is not necessarily gendered. It all depends on the article and the verbs you pair it with. But when Dilma Rousseff was elected the very first and so far only woman president in Brazil, she referred to herself not as Presidente Dilma Rousseff, but as Presidenta Dilma Rousseff, with an A at the end instead of an E. Presidenta is grammatically incorrect in Portuguese, but she insisted in using this female gendered variation of the word because she believed that by using the neutral presidente, she was actively downplaying the womanhood aspect of her presidency. She argued that the word presidente, even though neutral, carried a male connotation by association because there had never been a female president before and because neutral terms are usually defaulted to the male. And since her campaign and both her terms in office were marked by heavy, constant, and very aggressive misogynistic attacks, she felt it was important to highlight that she was a woman in a male-dominated space and that she'd been attacked for it. In English, can gender terms like hero and heroine, actor and actress ever be neutral or even good, or are they always somewhat negative and regressive by default? Related to this conversation are terms like Latinx. A part of the Brazilian left and Brazilian minorities are borrowing from their American counterparts the use of X as a replacement for O's and A's in gendered words as a solution to make them gender neutral and more welcoming of non-binary people. However, that raises a lot of issues because that is not really a sound that works within Portuguese rules. Additionally, it makes it impossible for text-to-speech accessibility software to read them for the visually impaired. There's a lot of debate right now on how to be more inclusive of gender neutrality in the language in a way that is pronounceable and does not exclude people who rely on accessibility software. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue. Thank you so much and keep up the amazing job you all are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Helcio, for your thoughts. That was super interesting and helpful. And I thought maybe we could dive into this because language is obviously really important to us. And I guess I want to start with, so I speak French badly, but I was once fluent in life. So I have an understanding around the languages like Spanish and Portuguese and French and Italian that are gendered, right? Like you just kind of have to memorize the words and know which ones reference are feminine and which ones are masculine. English doesn't have that. So in essence, English is, quote unquote, gender neutral in terms of we don't ascribe gender to objects or roles or nouns. But we do to me, that's why it seems like when we use the word hero or heroine or actor, actress, it seems unnecessary. And it seems really exclusionary to me in terms of, non-binary identities or gender identities that don't exist on the dichotomy there.
I mean, I guess I feel like the first word that pops into my head when I hear the question, well, how can a word with gendered just because it's gendered in a feminine or female way, how can that be negative? And I think, well, patriarchy, I don't know. To me, I guess concerns around the word heroine, for instance, sort of, to me, they suggest that there's almost something in doing that. It runs the risk of suggesting that whatever heroism a woman might achieve or aspire to or, accomplish is categorically different. It's somehow just categorically different and gendered in a way, than whatever a man, a male hero might accomplish, right? I just feel like it just puts it in a different kind of box almost, or at least there's a worry about that perception. However, I want to quickly note that there are times where I note that I do opt to use, for instance, the word actress. So, for instance, if I'm talking about a trans woman who is, who is in the acting profession, I don't want to be read. I don't want to run the risk of I want to honor.
It almost feels like misgendering.
Yeah,
maybe?
to call her, to say an actor, or that other people might think that, or that it's. Right. I don't know. It's almost like there's some utility in the gendered term, almost to say no. I'm clearly this person is definitely a woman. Make no mistake about that. So I feel like this is obviously it's a very complicated issue.
Yeah, and I think that there's also the aspect here. There's a difference between the sort of historical, technical, technicalities of language and of grammar, but then there's also all of the attitudes that we put onto those words, right? Which is what part of what Carolyn's getting at around patriarchy. So, for example, we don't say doctor and doctress, but we do have an assumption that when we say doctor, it means male. right? That there's a long-standing tradition that because women weren't allowed in the profession for a very long time. And so, and there's always that, do you remember that joke that people would tell, or I
can't operate on him. He's my son.
Yeah, right. And that joke only works because we have this assumption that doctor means male, right? And so there's a difference between it being built into the grammar and it being built into our society a little bit. And so for me, that's part of why I prefer to not and what Carolyn was saying too, in terms of there's a category of female hero when we have to use a different word for it, or we have to add female to the top of it, like female hero or black hero or what have you, because the default term means white straight man, right?
I would love for us to return to this conversation at a later time with people who are, native speakers of some of the languages that we've referenced before, particularly the Latinate languages, but also, people who are not just native speakers, but, linguists who can talk about this. So having made that caveat that I am neither of those things, and that the French I speak is so dollar store bootleg as to be non-existent, it is important to recognize that these things are not value neutral, even when we're not talking about nouns, roles, etc. But in fact, our understanding of the world and our shaping of the world comes through language. You cannot separate those things. And so even when we're not aware of it, when we say things like, la chambre, like the room, right? And you think, well, of course it's feminine, but it doesn't mean, that we think of it in a feminine way. We absolutely do. We absolutely do. When we think to ourselves, when we compose in our heads an understanding of the essence of the thing, it is shaped by the way that we speak those things, or how we understand those things, how we write them. And so you cannot say that it's important in one sphere, but it is not important in another sphere. But I also, I want to point out that the person who sent in that great freak out mentions the Portuguese president who wanted to go by presidenta instead of presidente, right? Because she's doing something like Caro with actress, that is very deliberate, So I think this is what is necessary, is more sort of critical awareness of language in the ways that it is utilized and composed. There is going to be no pro forma sort of one size fits all when it comes to language. And this is a wonderful thing. The language that we speak today, English that we speak today, is not the English that was spoken even 50 years ago, let alone 500 years ago, nor would we want it to be. As we expand our consciousness, as it shrinks in some ways, as we change, language changes. And I think we should embrace that. And just speaking about one term in particular, Latinx, I'm always going to be led by, people within the community. And so there are Latinx people, that I know, who I follow, who are like, this is where the term comes from. This is why we use it. And this is why we would prefer for you to use it. I recognize that there are other Latin people who are like, no, this is something that is imported from without. We don't use it, whatever. So, that conversation is necessary, and it's going to be tense and fraught. I have chosen to, ally myself with one side, but it was not something that I came up with. It was not something that I saw, white activists talking about, and that's where I got it from. It was from people who themselves are native Spanish speakers who say this is the term we want to use, Latinx. So that's where I'm coming from with it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that there's an interesting point there around the term Latinx, where Helcio, the person who gave the freak out, is talking about how the X sound doesn't really work in Portuguese, so that they have to figure out their own ways of using or finding gender
the
neutral
accessibility
terms.
Thing is huge. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, and I've been more and more having conversations with folks. For me, it's been coming up in game spaces and in terms of localization, which is language translations of dialogue in games around, if you're using a term like they or some other kind of gender neutral signifier, a different pronoun outside of the traditional pronouns that exist, that not every language allows for that right now, and or that there aren't even like an agreed upon lexicon around that in those communities. And so like the struggle with being inclusive, but not like imposing our shit into those communities, but also figuring out what they are. Like, I think it's actually really exciting that there is a much larger conversation happening around the importance of language, understanding language, recognizing the humanity in language, and that like language does change. And it's okay that we're using they, even though it's quote unquote not grammatically correct, although that's not true anymore, right? Because language does change. So, yeah, totally. And just to second what you were saying, Ebony, is like you follow the communities, right? Like what the communities are asking for is what we like shift with, and that's really, really important. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for that freak out. You know, we saw your comment in our Discord, and we're really glad that you were able to share it, so we could have this conversation and hopefully inspire other folks to have these conversations and think about these topics. So please submit your own freak out, whether you have a question or want to comment on something that we have said in a previous episode, or if you want to just bring up something that you're excited about or mad about, we'd love to hear from you. You can do that at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, which is only available to backers of this podcast, which you can learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. You can find us everywhere great podcasts are found. And if you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review us. This show is engineered by Rob Parrott. Carrie Stimson provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Thanks, y'all, for listening.
Bye.